Hello, and welcome to my trial lecture titled Gamification and Information Privacy Education. My name is Benjamin Knox. I'm a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Information Technology and Electrical Engineering at the Department of Information Security and Communication Technology at NTNU Järvik. The content of this lecture will have the following structure. Problem will be described, followed by an introduction to information privacy, education, and gamification. The gamification section will also cover the overlap between gamification and serious games, as well as a look at the darker side of gamification. A concept that binds all three aspects will be presented as a start point for the game mechanics necessary in this context. A number of trends and challenges will be discussed before I give some of my own reflections and summarize. When looking at the challenge of gamification and information privacy education, the first thing we need to acknowledge is that people are different and interpret and internalize risk-related information through the lens of cognitive and cultural biases. Rarely does one solution fit all, and people, like life, are somewhat unpredictable. Research has shown the effect both these factors have on how people regard security in general, as well as how they respond to security training. People require additional effort to overcome existing habits, as well as realizing their optimism bias. A very recent example of this is a study by the Norwegian Centre for Information Security that revealed more than half of the Norwegian population believes that the corona outbreak has led to society being more at risk than before to, for example, cybercrime. However, only a quarter believe that they themselves are more at risk. The discussion here then revolves around the optimism bias risk relating to people thinking that they have better control than they actually do have. Not only do we need to skill up when it comes to information privacy, we also need to bias down. Both require effortful learning to apply the metacognitive skills necessary for the kind of higher order thinking which involves active control over the cognitive processes when engaged in learning. Tech developers are focused on reducing the already existing and/or perceived cognitive and bureaucratic workload on users and companies to take information privacy seriously. But can we trust they are taking it seriously, considering the lucrative trade in data, as well as the high-profile cases of companies that we would expect to be taking information privacy seriously, clearly failing? For example, the Marriott International data breach between 2014 and 2018 that impacted 500 million customers. The attackers were able to take combinations of contact information, passport number, Starwood preferred guest numbers, travel information, and other personal information, including the credit card numbers and expiration dates of more than 100 million customers. Yahoo announced in September 2016 that in 2014 it had been the victim of what would be the biggest data breach in history. The breach compromised the names, dates of birth, email addresses and passwords, and security questions and answers of an estimated 3 billion users. There are also incidents where malicious actors were not involved, such as when an organization inadvertently leaves data unprotected and exposed. Twitter, for example, left the passwords of its 330 million users unmasked in 2018. New, more comprehensive data privacy laws have been enacted or proposed in the past few years, and it has become an imperative for companies of all sizes across all industries to prioritize the protection of personal data. Companies face consequences in the form of fines and loss of business reputation if they do not take data privacy seriously. Many of these regulations are placing power in the hands of the people to determine how their data can be handled. This exposes the end-to-end challenge for education. The individual app user needs to understand what information privacy is and how it affects them, as well as the company employee responsible for ensuring compliance with the laws needs to have a full grasp of the strategic consequences should something happen to the personal data they hold on individuals. Given the context I am describing, it is no surprise that finding the best educational fit to improve learner performance concerning information privacy is a significant challenge. Gamification is an accelerating trend, Unfortunately, the practice of gamification has far outpaced researcher understanding of its processes and methods, meaning way up the intended and unintended consequences is still a work in progress. Even so, gamification is widely perceived as a silver bullet for meeting contemporary challenges. It is efficient as it aligns with today's learner paradigms, cheap as it is available to the furthest reaches of cyberspace, and it infuses our world with lots of fun. Before I begin looking at an approach that combines gamification, information privacy, and education, I will introduce each topic independently. Information privacy is the privacy of personal information and usually relates to personal data stored on computer systems. Information privacy is also known as data privacy and is governed by the laws that prohibit the disclosure or misuse of information about private individuals. The need to maintain information privacy is applicable to collected personal information such as medical records, financial data, criminal records, political records, business-related information, or website data. As you can see from the image on the right, it's worth noting that data privacy now includes such things as genetic, mental, cultural, economic, or social information. There is the potential for large fines and reputational damage for those found to be in breach of the rules. Here I highlight just two very recent examples concerning the Marriott hotel chain and Cathay Pacific. Also, as people may have recently read, EasyJet have admitted a significant data breach. For the purpose of this lecture, there are two aspects from the same BBC News article that I would like to read relating to the potential consequence to EasyJet, as well as the individual customers. The Information Commissioner's Office, a non-departmental public body in the United Kingdom, said, "People have a right to expect that organisations will handle their personal information securely and responsibly. When that doesn't happen, we will investigate and take robust action where necessary." This emphasises the pressure on organisations to deliver on information privacy or face tangible financial consequences, as well as the intangible consequence to their reputation. Secondly, the ICO warned people who choose to trust EasyJet with their data to be vigilant as a consequence of this breach, meaning there is now an onus of responsibility on the customer to defend against being exploited in the future. They may also have to consider how they want to manage their data in the future. One of the issues giving rise to increasing concern about the effectiveness of the legislation and/or information privacy codes is their inability to keep up with technology. I show this slide to visualize a key point concerning the state of affairs regarding data privacy. Although the graph doesn't make clear whether the blue line is about things that are the cause of relevance or the result of it, the point is to show that awareness of privacy issues and how action to increase or protect them increases both the cause and the result, and both are lagging behind the number of data points, sets, nodes that can be breached as information technology pervades. We are all aware of the pervasiveness of technological developments that most of us take for granted every day and allow into our lives. However, for most users, the blue line is something rarely considered. Developers, companies, and governments are expected to be on top of the game and have our best interests and privacy in hand. But as the graph exemplifies, the relevance projection of data protection compared to that of information technologies protection is somewhat lagging, meaning the data owner and the approved data user are at risk from the attacker who is well positioned to exploit both curves. As an example of information privacy, I will introduce the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, a GDPR. This was implemented in May 25, 2018, and it is the biggest change or more precisely, evolution to data protection in recent years. Essentially, it has given data protection and existing legislation a much-needed revamp so that it can now be more relevant in today's digital, social media-driven world. GDPR seeks to expand and update rules that have been in place since 1995 and unify a patchwork of different laws into one piece of legislation. One of the biggest changes is that it gives consumers a better understanding as to what they are signing up to at the point that they can choose to share their data. Companies must use clear language to obtain authorization from an individual to use their data, and they must also notify individuals that their data was potentially compromised within 72 hours of realizing the data breach occurred. Data processors are also required to notify their customers without undue delay. Additional requirements make it easier for individuals to learn how their data is going to be used and processed, request data erasure, and receive the personal data that organizations collect. The European Union said the new rules are necessary to protect consumers in an era of huge cyber attacks and data leaks. It was designed to harmonize data privacy laws across all of its member countries, as well as providing greater protection and rights to individuals. GDPR was also created to alter how businesses and other organizations can handle the information of those that interact with them. Countries within Europe were given the ability to make their own small changes to suit their own needs. Within the United Kingdom, this flexibility led to the creation of the Data Protection Act in 2018, which superseded the previous 1998 Data Protection Act. To expand briefly beyond Europe, the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, that came into effect this year is comparable to GDPR and is seen as a progressive approach to how people's personal data could be handled. Considering that California is the union's largest state and the world's fifth largest economy, the impact could go a long way to determining how the US approaches information privacy in the years ahead. As shown in the last slide, there is the potential for large fines and reputational damage for those found to be in breach of the rules. But why does it need educating? Well, GDPR, just as other national regulations relating to information privacy, are there to protect us, put us in control, and set out the practical and legal frameworks for the companies, organizations, institutions that hold personal data. Multiple types of actors now have skin in the game, and that means finding an adequate educational approach that can motivate people to learn, not just once, but at regular intervals, so they remain current and cognitively flexible enough to understand what it means to have control of your data. When looking at education for information privacy across populations and user types, the most important approach has been to conduct training that endeavours to build awareness. When conducting this type of training, it is extremely important to always provide an explanation of why security policies and guidelines are the way they are. It will have a significant motivational impact on the employees if a logical and relevant reasoning underlines the policies and regulations. Puhakainen and Siponen proposed a new approach to security awareness training based on constructivism. They wrote that training material should be communicated in ways that will trigger cognitive processing of the information, which will cause longer-lived memory and ownership of the knowledge. Learning tasks should be of personal relevance to the recipients. Learning tasks should account for previous knowledge. Security communication should be integrated with normal business communication to show that security is an important component in the normal work and business activities. And lastly, security communication should be a continuous activity rather than periodic. In 2009, Shaw et al. Determined in an experimental study that there are positive correlations between the media richness used and the acquired awareness level of the recipients. The conclusion was that hypermedia, or online media, with interactive and adaptable forms of communication are the most effective for security awareness training. In 2015, Wall summarized the following attributes as strength for security awareness programs: continual and flexible analysis and reporting of user performance, flexible and customizable curriculum, interactive exercises, completeness and richness in terms of content, content optimized for variable device sizes, and high-frequency, short-duration packaging. Regarding awareness training for information security, it has been stated that programs are developed based on the assumptions that users A. fail to adopt secure practices either because they are not aware of the risks or because they do not understand the implications of security violations, or B. because they do not understand how they are expected to act. There is also concern among researchers that security standards and guidelines do not take into consideration whether knowledge of the awareness material will actually result to improve security. What is apparent, though, is the obvious need for awareness programs to go beyond the simple communication of security-related information and align with the process of individual decision-making. Gamification can be utilized as a tool to unlock performance potential as it promotes higher levels of engagement, behavioral changes, and stimulates innovation. The definition of gamification is not entirely clear-cut. It tends to differ slightly in terms of phrasing and broadness in various publications. The overarching concept is the use of game design techniques and game mechanics in non-game contexts in order to change behavior, develop skills, or drive innovation among a target audience. That may be employees, customers, or a community. Therefore, the Deterding et al. Definition of the use of video game elements in non-gaming systems to improve user experience and user engagement in non-game services and applications is a good fit and commonly used. Schools, workplaces, healthcare systems, travel, marketing, leisure, and social interaction, and even sex is becoming even more gamified. Using game mechanics or elements in non-game situations to enhance motivation and influence behavior requires learning designers use, for example, narratives, points, dynamic difficulty adjustment, loss aversion, leaderboards, and badges to motivate online learners. Often learners are challenged to complete the first level of training in order to unlock the next one. As an approach to learning, gamification has shown very good effects concerning learner motivation and learning outcomes. A good example for understanding how a gamification approach can unlock performance potential is presented by Chuck Coonrat, the author of Game of Work. Coonrat talked about the epiphany he had watching a bunch of young men building a house. It was slow drudgery and was taking them forever. But come lunchtime, they would run down to a basketball court, pick sides for a 4-on-4 pickup game, go shirts and skins, and compete like they were both NBA teams. It was a motivational paradox. How come they put everything they had into a recreational game on their lunch hour, but couldn't seem to do the same with their work? Coonrat realized it wasn't a raw material or attitude problem. There was a motivation to recreation that he wanted to understand. Coonrat understood the power of instantaneous feedback. It became clear that companies that wait for a whole year to give feedback in an annual appraisal don't just miss the mark by a mile, they miss it by half the globe. He calls immediate feedback the secret sauce. The scorecards and goals are just methods. Particularly in highly complex situations, leading to cognitive load, or particularly eventless periods of time that demands high vigilance, self-regulatory skills are required to keep up the attentional levels needed for the pursuit of demanding tasks. Self-regulation is highly motivation dependent, and social interaction requires cognitive processes draining motivational and self-regulatory resources. Gamification has been shown to have enormous capabilities regarding the enhancement and maintenance of motivation, and thus performance in highly demanding tasks. The critical discourse concerning gamification and game design is still evolving. At the end of the last century, in their unpublished essay, Luntz and Zimmerman wrote, "Games are among the most ancient and sophisticated forms of designed interaction. And as reality increasingly dovetails with the virtual, games have a tremendous amount to teach us about building inhabitable and meaningful social spaces. The game designer becomes a model for the architect, educator, scientist, artist, scholar, and others who invent and investigate the world." 21 years on, and this statement is extant. Gamification is not to be confused with serious games, which are games in which education, in its various forms, is the primary goal, rather than entertainment. Serious games have a much longer history than gamification, but research in their universal benefit also lags behind the actual use across domains. Serious games are different from gamification. They use traditional game techniques around serious business or social concepts. Serious games can be fun, but they have to be aligned with learning goals. The idea is to use gameplay to create a better understanding of a particular concept. Serious games can be used for reinforcing behaviors. The distinction between serious games and games purely for entertainment is that the serious game has a serious outcome, like for example learning a societal message. One of the earliest examples is Kriegsspiel, used by the German army in the 1700s to train soldiers in the strategies of warfare. To this day, a key phase of the operational planning process in most modern militaries is the war game phase, where the concept of operation is played out against an opponent's most likely course of action or their most dangerous course of action. War game participants experience the rigor and the implications of decision-making in a safe-to-fail environment, without the risk, expense, and disruption of live exercises or real operations. However, for the purpose of this lecture, I do not intend to lose myself in comparing the two. Rather, I will highlight now where they overlap and use this as a launchpad for the remainder of the presentation. Even though gamification and serious games are different concepts, they have common benefits. Serious games and gamification can help motivate learners. Some may be motivated intrinsically, but others, who need an extra push, can benefit from game techniques. Rewards, both tangible and intangible, go a long way. There is also the aspect that game mechanics and gameplay have the ability to take away boredom and make learning fun. Both techniques blend the real world with fiction. This is a way to enable learners to identify with the situation and remain engaged. They are able to put their existing knowledge into practice, giving them agency and increased self-efficacy. Some may feel that they are just playing a game or winning some points, but they are learning and, depending on the game mechanics, applying new skills. Both techniques help learners improve themselves through their mistakes. If they make a mistake, they cannot proceed further. They know they have to hone a particular skill to move ahead. Instant feedback ensures that they know where they are going wrong. Learners are allowed to make as many mistakes as they need to and learn from them. Lastly, the use of friendly competition nudges learners to put in their best effort. Learners can be pitted against each other through leaderboards, and each learner tries to reach the top of the board to prove his or her mettle. The catch is that to reach the top, learners need to have a relevant skill. If they lack those skills, they need to return to the training ground and learn them again. Gamification is context dependent, and applying game elements requires proper design. This is especially so in an educational context. A solid body of research has highlighted the positive impact of gamification elements in educational context, dealing with users' behavior and increasing their motivation. there has been less attention paid to the possible negative outcomes related to bad design of gamified elements in education domains. It has been discussed that gamification may wear out in a scenario in which gamification design has not been considered. This emphasizes again the criticality of design, and in this case, the balancing aspect. For example, design that avoids the risk of mechanics that encourage extrinsic rewards negatively affects learners' intrinsic motivation. This table is the outcome of a limited study by Todo et al. As you see, and as they noted, the points, badges, leaderboards approach may not be suitable for gamifying certain situations and contexts. What this does do is it demonstrates again the necessity that a gamification design template should consider individual profiles, instructional and motivational design theories. It should identify a way to engage with the people you want to connect with. Political regimes with the necessary cyberpower use the gamification logic to control populations. With enormous outreach, this is expected to be far more effective, especially given the active role the citizen has to play of educating populations. An example that is worth highlighting is the Chinese government's building of an omnipotent social credit system. It's unlikely that people think about gamification concerning this plan. However, it is likely that people will be motivated to engage as their trustworthiness or willingness to hand over their information is rewarded in the form of social credit. Behaving in a way that leads to poor credit and low ranking risks individuals not being granted a loan, not being able to purchase goods online, or even arrange a date. The discussion about whether this builds a better and fairer society, or is it a nightmarish Orwellian system, goes beyond this lecture. However, this reward and punishment system will have consequences, as it will inevitably lead to engagement, behaviour changes, and stimulate all kinds of innovation. I will now zoom in on a number of motivational and learning theories in psychology that can describe the effects of gamification when it is implemented as an instructional intervention. Considering that consequences is a key factor in the context of information privacy and the need to adapt behaviours, then the most appropriate focus for ensuring learning outcomes relating to gamification is called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a form of learning based on behavioural consequences. It has three phases: an antecedent event or stimulus, a behavioural response to that stimulus, and a consequence depending upon that response. In a modern learning context, this can be exemplified by a learner who knows a difficult test is looming. As a result of the impending test, the learner studies harder than usual. As a result of extra studying, the learner scores a higher grade than usual. The learner has thus been reinforced to study harder in the future. Behavioural consequences can either be reinforcement, which will increase certain response, or punishment, which decrease certain responses. Depending on factors such as culture and demographic of learners, the game mechanics can be designed to promote either response. Obtaining a desired behaviour through reinforcement is known as shaping. When the target response occurs and is reinforced, the behaviour will increase. Shaping is a way to acquire certain target responses without explicitly explaining what response is desirable. An underlying psychological process that frames the theoretical background of gamification is self-determination theory. Based on the works of Ivan Pavlov, John Watson, and B.F. Skinner, conditioning has been a main aspect of gamification. Whereas Pavlov and Watson are known for their classical conditioning paradigms, where learning to associate a non-related stimulus, for example a bell, to an outcome, for example food, which then the bell could produce same outcomes, salivation, as food could. Skinner's paradigm focused more on rewarding wanting behaviours, i.e. positive conditioning. The same processes are applied to gamification. Gamification involves rewarding players with achievements, whether attaining a higher level, earning trophies, or unlocking abilities, or, for example, skins. Conditioning and gamification has been related to increasing motivation through different psychological processes. Self-determination theory explains motivation for any activity an individual pursues. Self-determination theory regards intrinsic motivation for an activity as part of human nature and is within the control continuum ranging from amotivation, i.e. lack of motivation, to extrinsic motivation, to intrinsic motivation. Self-determination theory is built on White's 1959 concept of effectance motivation, which is described as an innate drive to build competencies which meet psychological satisfactions. When the goal is identifying and implementing an education intervention that can condition people through a motivational learning paradigm, then the likelihood of making poor decisions may be reduced, leading to better outcomes and bolstering security behaviour concerning information privacy. When we place motivation as a universal concept common to gamification, education, and information privacy, we can begin to define and operationalize the gamification mechanics that need to be applied to encourage better behaviours. The challenge lies in finding a gamified approach that is adaptable enough to cater for multiple individuals' needs, whether they be cognitive, cultural, or something else. All three require that participants are willing to engage in cognitively tough activities that require methods for conditioning that build participants' self-determination. Therefore, improving self-monitoring and self-regulatory processes, i.e. the cognitive functions associated with self-determination, that are necessary attributes if we care for our information privacy, can be the central themes in developing a gamification approach that has self-directed educational learning strategies as its fundamental mechanics. Skinner's conditioning approach could be a good starting point. By asking a simple question, are you interested in this topic? Learners' yes or no answer can direct them on a gamified educational path that suits their individual motivation for the subject and at that particular point in time. Extrinsic and intrinsic motivation for a subject can change over time, and therefore at a later date, or at a fixed or variable schedule, an individual may choose to follow the alternate yes-no path to trigger behaviour change that they know will be for the better, or they may click the same yes or no answer, again, to reinforce their existing motivation and get challenged at a different level of learning difficulty, for example. When introducing gamification, firms, organisations may need to start from the top down. Phase 1 could be a wargaming, a data breach scenario at a senior level. By simulating the company going through a cyber attack and presenting leadership with a hack where they have lost, say, 20,000 records, and ask, what do you do next? When do you talk to the press? And what do you say? This is where wargaming can work as a pain-free mental exercise that helps an organisation manage the foreseen and maybe become better at dealing with the unforeseen. As critical questions are asked and senior level leaders or begin to ask their own critical questions, their knowledge and understanding gaps are identified. This revealing process can help to upskill the workforce and reveal biases in a motivating, non-threatening environment. It may also clear the way for a Skinner approach, as objective truths are realised and considered. At an individual educational level, the approach might be better to introduce game mechanics that aim to encourage people to focus on the consequences as a pathway to learning motivation. Chuck Kunrat likened it to trying to work on Michael Jordan's jump shot. Don't do it, he said. You just frustrate him. Instead, you should talk about how many points per game he needs to achieve, and then leave the rest up to him. In this example, Michael Jordan understands the consequences of him not scoring enough points in a game, the painful feeling of loss. Unfortunately, in most people's daily lives, they do not know or consider the consequences of data being stolen or sold to a third-party actor with a malicious intent. So people have a realistic understanding of the physical and cyber-related consequences of events and their actions. I'm not advocating to up a loss aversion bias, as this risks further distortion of perception and judgment compared to objective truth. The goal is not to underestimate the risk, to have a realistic assessment of the risk and take the low probability, high impact into account. An approach could be to apply game mechanics that remove the optimism bias. Through debiasing optimism, motivation to act may rise as fear increases, but not in the irrational, emotional way, but a realistic way. For example, making risks easier to imagine through examples, as one experiences the positive outcomes of the cyber world. Possibly, people with bad security behavior should face more individual examples. That triggers, not enhances, the availability heuristic. When someone knows a case, it's available in their memory, and thus they consider it more likely. The future of information privacy may lie with distributed identity. This cloud system enables individuals, organizations, and devices to have ownership so they control their digital identity and data. The critical factor with this solution is the user can also take back data at any time. Considering the amount of data we produce, it will be interesting to see how, for example, Microsoft, who are leading the way with DID, see educating people to handle their own data. This presents potentially a healthy market for gamification learning designers. There are also companies that have business models whereby users get paid for data they provide. One such example is CitizenMe. They have a gamified solution where users get paid to answer quizzes about themselves. Gamification can be a privacy risk in itself, since by using gamified services, users' information is often disclosed. It is important then that gamified education core mechanics do not violate user privacy. This adds an additional layer of complexity, as it is also crucial to educate users on privacy issues relating to the gamification method, whose principles may harm privacy requirements. Gamification has the potential to get us there quicker, i.e. skill up regarding how we educate for information privacy. However, investment is needed to weave into this new form of identity an engaging education package of motivating game-based scenarios that can engage and shape user understanding to the point where each one of us has enough savvy to know and feel that we actually have control in a form of self-ownership. With the onset of such things as distributed identity, I wonder if we are entering a new phase of trust. There is the risk that the thinking aspect of what we do regarding data privacy will be taken away from us as we hand over and consent to new approaches to managing our data securely. When Microsoft rightly described today's situation as one where we people grant consent to numerous apps and devices that warrants a high degree of vigilance, are they also implicitly saying that in the future, with, for example, DIDs, we will not need to be as vigilant? How teaching is delivered today is the same as it was over a century ago. As the educational reformer John Dewey wrote in 1917, "If we teach today as we thought yesterday, we rob students of tomorrow." Are we investing enough time and research into education approaches that prepare people for tomorrow's information privacy challenges? The corona pandemic has seen changes to educational delivery, and in many cases learners have been given the opportunity to be more deterministic and teachers more creative. At the same time, we've seen a significant rise in cybercrime and attempts by nefarious actors to target our information. With the increase in digital solutions to home office and home school, why have we not accompanied this with an engaging educational package to increase user vigilance? Finally, any gamification approach to information privacy education has an ethical aspect that cannot be overlooked. Privacy violations are harmful and as such ethically, legally, technically and socially very important. For this reason, when designing privacy-friendly and secure gamified services, it is important to address several ethical and social issues relating to how users are able to protect their own security and privacy. If a user becomes aware of this, then these key ethical issues will be addressed. To summarize, I will highlight 6 key points relating to gamification and information privacy education. Firstly, designing an education for information privacy needs to have the effect of bolstering security behavior. Gamification has been shown to have enormous capabilities regarding the enhancement and maintenance of motivation and thus performance in highly demanding tasks. Therefore, based on a good track record, gamification has huge potential in the area of educating information privacy. However, it has its potential risks that can lead to indifference, loss of performance, undesired behavior, and declining effects. Most of these risks relate to the design mechanics and such things as points, badges, and leaderboards. So we see the importance of focusing on the design and getting the game mechanics right for the user. As Thomas Schelling, the famous Rand wargamer and Nobel laureate, once said, "It's got to be easy for participants to be active, to really get immersed in the game. A good game really surfaces questions about what just happened and leads you to insights that you hadn't thought of." By placing motivation as a core function behind gamification mechanics, educational needs and information privacy requirements, then factors such as cognitive and cultural biases can be shaped, and the need to skill up and bias down can be addressed with positive reinforcement. This can potentially begin at a very early stage in people's education. Lastly, the risks of violating privacy need to be considered when using gamification to improve knowledge on information privacy. Gamification can be a privacy risk in itself. Here's a list of references that I used to prepare this presentation. Thank you very much for listening. This concludes my lecture.